Okay, in this part, we're going to learn how to create buttons that can only be unlocked once another item is purchased. So, for example, if we want the player to firstly buy the conveyor, and then once they've bought the conveyor, the button for the dropper then appears, okay, rather than every single button being visible when the player first joins. So, to do this, there's a few ways, and I'm sure there's, perfectly acceptable ways of doing this. But the way I've decided to do it is for every button, if you want it to then unlock some other buttons once you've purchased the item, we're going to create an attribute for it. So I'm going to create a string. I'm going to call it item IDs to appear once bought. Okay, and then I'm just going to put the IDs of the items that I want to appear when they've purchased this item. So let's say they want to make the dropper appear, okay? So it doesn't mean they're going to buy the dropper, it just means the dropper becomes purchasable. So that has an ID of 2. So we're going to change the item IDs to appear once bought to 2. Now, we set this to be a string, okay? We didn't set it to be a number. So whilst we have a number here, it's actually a string, okay? And this is because you might want to have multiple item IDs, right? So let's say we wanted to have items 2, 3, 4, and 5 appear once we've bought them. We can do this because it's a string. So it's essentially text. It's not actually a number. This is just some text. However, you can see the ID of item to unlock is a number. If we try to give it multiple values, it won't let us. So the reason I've made this a string is so that we can allow multiple items to then be visible or purchasable once this this conveyor has been unlocked. And what we'll do is we'll write some code which will extract the numbers from this string, and we can make them all appear. So what we now want to do is we want to go to our code, and when this item is unlocked, we're going to want to individually make these buttons appear. So in the plot handler, around line 79, where we've got the button.touched, we want to scroll down past the point where we know that they can afford the item. And what we want to do is we then want to see if the button has an item IDs to appear once bought attribute. So we can say local item IDs to appear once bought equals button get attribute item IDs to appear once bought, like this, okay? And then we can check to see if that actually exists, because it might not exist. We might not have set an attribute for that button. So if item IDs to appear once bought, then we want to take this string and we want to turn it into the individual numbers, because this is just one string right now. We want to get these 4 numbers, or however many numbers there are, from this string. So we're going to say local numbers. So I also local item IDs to item IDs equals string dot split. Okay, and this is going to split the string up into pieces so we can get the individual numbers. So item IDs to appear once bought, and that's our string. And then we tell the game what the separator is. And the separator is the character in between the numbers. In our case, it's commas, okay? Because we've got 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're basically saying where there's a comma in this string, split it up, and so that we can get the individual character that's to the left or to the right of it. In that case, the numbers, whether that's number 2, number 3, number 4, or number 5. So if we put our comma in here, as a string by using the quote marks or speech marks, we can then, this will now be the table of our numbers. So it will look something like this: 2, 3, 4, 5. But because this is a table, we can then get the individual numbers from it by indexing that table. So we want to loop through this table. So for underscore, comma, item ID in item IDs do, we now have the individual item ID number. So we will loop through and we will do it for 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what we want to do is we want to firstly get the item in the template items by its ID. Sorry, I mean get the button. Okay, so local, we can just call it local button. I am wary that we have got a variable already called button here, but since this is nested within our for loop, it will only apply to this for loop, so it's okay. So button equals, we want to find the button in the buttons folder here in the workspace that has the ID of item to unlock. So what we're actually going to do is I'm going to create another function like we did earlier, which, just like these ones, which will let us do an action like this without having to nest that code in this for loop here. So I'm going to call the function get button by ID of item to unlock, okay? And I'm going to pass that item ID to our function. And we will code the function to return the button object to this variable. So let's just copy the name of this function and go to the top of our script. And we're going to create a local function, and we're going to call it the same, get button by ID of item to unlock. Now we're also going to need to pass the player and the item ID. So let's go back down and let's just pass the player as well to this function, because this function is outside of our create plot event, which passes the player. So we have to keep a reference to that player so that we can access that player from this function. So that's why we pass it to this function. And so what we're going to do is we're going to loop through this player's plot. So we're firstly going to want to get their plot. So I'm just going to move this function below the get plot function. And then I'm going to call it. So local plot equals get plot player. If not plot, then return end, because we obviously don't want to carry on if there's no plot for some reason. This is just like a fail safe. Now we can loop through the buttons folder in that plot. So for underscore comma button in plot.buttons get children, do if button get attributes ID of item to unlock. In fact, we will create a variable for this. Local ID of item to unlock. If ID of item to unlock, we just need to make sure it exists, just in case you've forgotten to set up this attribute. It would be nil, and it would then cause an error. So we can actually say if not ID of item to unlock, then continue end, and that will just move on to the next button in the loop. By this point, we know that the attribute exists, so we can say if item ID is equal to ID of item to unlock, then return button end. Okay, and I'm going to actually put this onto another line just to make it more readable. So this is going to return the button, and if there is no button, it won't return anything at all. So we can now go back down to our code, and where is it? Here it is. So we now have the button, but let's just make sure it exists. So if not button, then continue end. And then by this point, we know that the button exists. We have now found the button. So we want to make it visible. Now it's going to be visible already because we haven't actually written any code that hides it. So I think we should do that first. So let's figure out how we should hide this button. Now there's two ways we can do this. The first method, which is the easier method, is we just add an attribute to every button that we want to only appear once another button has been touched. And we can just add an attribute to that to say hidden. And then when the game first loads, it will hide all of those buttons. The other option is we loop through every single button and we see if it is listed in another button in the item IDs to appear once bought string. However, that would mean if you have a lot of items, it's going to be looping over every single item, and it might cause some performance issues. So that's the way I see it. Some people in the comments might have their own, view. So personally, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to choose the buttons I don't want to appear by default when the Tycoon loads, and I'm just going to add a Boolean attribute, okay, and I'm going to call it hidden, and I'm going to click save. I'm going to make it true. Now, some people would argue that having to set another attribute is just another thing you have to remember to do, and that's true. However, I think for this Tycoon and for this series, it's the simplest method of doing it. So there's no right or wrong answer. This will work either way. I just wanted to explain myself. So what we can now do, now that we've set up this hidden attribute in the button, is when we load in our buttons in the plot handler around line 86, we want to firstly check to see if this is hidden. So we can say if button get attribute hidden, then we want to hide the button. So button.transparency equals 1. And we also don't want it to unlock the item when you touch it, because you can still obviously touch it when it is hidden. So firstly, we're going to say button.canCollide equals false. And then in the button.touched event, we want to say if button get attribute hidden, then return end, okay? Because if it is hidden, if it is true, then it will just end the event there. So let's just, also we're going to need to hide the items as well. So we've hidden the button, we just now need to hide the items, I believe. Or actually that might be done by itself, right? Because we haven't actually touched that button yet. So I think we're good there. So I think let's just go back to our conveyor button, and let's change the item IDs to appear once bought. I only want to unlock the dropper. So the dropper has ID 2. So we're just going to change this value to 2, because obviously we don't have any other items with the IDs of 4 or 5 yet. So you've set this to be 2, so that when this button, the conveyor is pressed, then the item IDs to appear once bought are going to be 2, and that is the dropper. So the dropper button is going to appear when we've stepped on the conveyor button and we've bought the conveyor. Anyway, let's just check this out. Now, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to just in my no, I'm not going to do that actually. I'm just going to click on play. Now, if you're like me and you've tested the game a few times and you realise you can't go back to the start because you've unlocked everything, let me show you how to solve that, because that's what I've just realised. So you want to go and get the data store editor. Now, I think it costs 100 Robux. So if you don't want to pay for it, you just want to change player data sorry, to something else. So you might want to change it to player data 2. But if you do that, it's going to reset every player's data, okay? So if you want to get the old data back, just change it to what it originally was called. But like I'm saying, the better way to do it is to use the data store editor plugin, which we talked about in the last episode. So you click on it, and then I'm just going to drag it to fill up the whole screen, right? And then you type in your name of your data store, which is in that script. So it was called player data for me. And then you put player underscore and then their user ID, which is the format we set it up in the data script, player underscore and then the user ID. So in my case, it's player underscore 14943069, which is my user ID. You click on data. And you don't even have to click on data. You can just click on the delete and click on delete, and that will delete my data for that slot. So it only affects me. If you had other players in your game, wouldn't affect them, obviously, because it's just deleting my data, my specific user ID. So now we're back. Let's walk over, and I'm going to need to give myself some cash. So whilst I'm walking over, I'm going to switch to server mode by clicking on current client. I'm going to go to the properties, go to the explorer, find my player, find my leader stats, go to my cash. I'm going to set it to 500. I'm going to go back to current client mode. I'm going to walk over here. And you can see that the dropper button is not there, although the text above it is, and that's because we just forgot to turn that off. But I can walk over it. Technically, sorry, you can't see that, I just realized. Technically, you can see the text is there, but the button isn't. But the button is still there. Like if I get the select tool out and hold down Alt, you'll see it's here. The button is here, I can step on it, whatever. It's just not working because it's set to be transparent, and in the properties panel, you can see that the hidden property is true. Now, let me just walk over. I'm going to try and keep it in view, okay? You can't see my character, but if you just watch closely, I'm about to step on the conveyor button, which is right here. If you watch this hidden attribute, if I just step on it, okay, I've bought the conveyor. However, the dropper button is still not appearing. So let's go and fix that. So firstly, let's fix the text appearing above the button. So we go to the plot handler, we go to the if statement here where we set the transparency, and we're just going to say button.billboard.GUI.enabled equals false. Okay, so that's the first part done. Secondly, we need to set the button's hidden attribute to be false when the player buys an item. So we'll just scroll down here to the item IDs to appear once bought. This is where we left it, right? We left it here because we had a comment that we wanted to make the button visible. So we can now say button.transparency equals 0, button.billboard.GUI.enabled equals true, and button.canCollide equals true. And also button set attribute hidden, and we can just set this to nil. And that should just remove it, I believe. Or you could set it to false, it doesn't really matter. I think nil will just remove it. So let's, I think that's all good. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go back to the plugins, data store editor, and then we're going to put in my data, player data, and then player underscore 149430069. And then I'm just going to delete the items table because I want to keep my cache at 450. I don't want to have to bother with, you know, setting my cache again on the server and all that. So if we go back and click on play, and we're just going to have to walk over again. This time you can see that the text above the billboard is gone, of the button that was hidden, so that's a good thing. And hopefully when we step on this button, if we just go back to have a look at our button, which is hidden over there, we have a look at the hidden property. You just watch this hidden property when I step on the button. Okay, I'm going to step on it. It is still true for some reason. Okay, well, we're going to have to look into that. So for some reason, the dropper button is still true, and I have a feeling this might be because when we do this string.split on the item IDs, these are still strings, aren't they? They're not numbers, and we are sending this item ID to our function, but this item ID is still technically a string because it was a string when we set it in the item IDs to appear once bought. We only just split it up so that we had separated the IDs, but they're still strings. So let's see what happens if we change these to be a string. We can say item ID equals to number item ID. This will change it from a string to a number. So let's go back. Let's go back to the data store editor. Just look up my player data, player underscore 149430069. And this is really what debugging is about. Like, you know, it only took me a couple of seconds to realize what the problem was here. But for you watching this video, you might have been stuck on this problem for a very long time. It might have even driven you to give up because it's not something you can just see. It's something you have to know because you have to think logically, and you have to think about the reasons why something might be going wrong and all of the underlying causes, which is a key skill in programming, really. So that's why I leave these sort of problems in the video. And you can see, if you just missed that, I stepped on the conveyor, and the dropper button has now appeared, which means it is working, which is perfect. So if we now step on the dropper, we can purchase that. And there we go. We've just managed to set up buttons which unlock themselves once you've unlocked another button, which is really cool. So let's just click on stop and let's load our plot one more time just to make sure everything's going well. And there you go. It all seems to be working perfectly. So there you go. That's how you add a set of buttons that keep on unlocking other buttons. All you have to do is just add the hidden attribute to the button that you want to hide, and then on the button which you want to step on to unlock more items, you add the item IDs to appear once bought. Make sure it's a string. That way you can set it to unlock multiple items. And we can test this actually. If we change this to 2 and comma 1, so it also unlocks the painting, and then we add the hidden, you have to add the hidden billboard as well, attribute to the item as well that you want to hide. We can try this one last time. I'm just going to reset my data. Player data, player 149436069, delete. And if you don't know what your Roblox user ID is, go to your Roblox profile and it will appear in the URL. Alternatively, you can just go to players, choose your player, and it's right here, character appearance ID. So that's how you find it. It's worth memorizing. I know mine off by heart. And if you're a developer, you probably also know yours. So we'll just give ourselves some cash on the server. And you can notice that the painting button is also gone. So what should happen is when we step on the conveyor, it should appear, both the dropper and the painting. Now, I also want to test one more thing, which is now that we've unlocked the buttons, if we leave and rejoin, are they going to still be there? Now, I have a hunch that they won't. No, they are gone, and this is a flaw. So this would break the game, because if you have unlocked the buttons, but you've not unlocked the items, they are gone for good. So how are we going to solve this? Well, really, we just need to take this code that we've written already, which will unlock the items when you step on the button. And up here, when we load in all of the buttons, we have this if statement that checks to see if the item's already been unlocked. And we just continue if that's the case. However, just before the continue, I think if we paste this here, it should just load the buttons. So I want to test this. Let's just see if this works, because this would be a really quick fix if that is the case. So let's click on the play button and see what happens. Okay, we have an error which says buttons is not a valid member of part. Let's have a look into that. So line 18. Line 18, line 95. Apologies, I also just realised you couldn't see what I just typed in. But all I did was I went and took this code, which is here, for the item IDs to appear once bought. I've copied it and I've just pasted it up here. So apologies about that. So yeah, so we have a problem on line 18 here. So let's go to line 18. Line 18. Okay, plot.buttons. Buttons is not a valid member of plot 1. Okay. Plots. Buttons. So there should be a button. So it's because I think the buttons folder is not yet in the plot. Okay, yeah, so let's take this code and we'll just remove it. So it was as you were. You don't have to worry about changing any of this. But I'm just going to take that code. I'm going to wait until we've looped through all of the buttons, and I'm going to do another loop once the buttons folder has been added to the plot. I'm going to say for underscore button in template buttons get children do. I'm going to paste I'm going to hold on. I'm going to take this again. This condition, which checks to see if the item's ID of the button's item ID of item to unlock is in the item IDs table, which means they own the button and they've unlocked it. And then this will should make the items appear that are in the button's ID of items to appear once bought. It should make them appear just like we do at this part of the script when you tap on the button. So let's click on play again. And okay, there we go. So it seems to be working now. The items are indeed, the buttons are indeed appearing. Last time they weren't. So that seems to be working just fine. And we will try it one more time from a new save, just to be completely sure. Oh, it's always good to test, make sure everything's working. So plugins, data store editor, and then player data, and then player underscore 14943069. We're just going to remove the items table and click on save. And we'll rejoin. I'm going to click on play here, just to teleport me straight to the plot. And there we go. So we're now going to walk over. And the only button that appears is, of course, the starter item. But we now have our other two buttons appearing. I'm going to click on stop. And I'm going to rejoin, just to make sure it's all good, it's all working. And there we go, all good. Seems to be working. I'm going to leave again. I'm going to play one more time. So this time, the painting should load, the conveyor should load, and the dropper button should load, but the dropper shouldn't be there. And it all seems to be working perfectly fine. So that was how to add extra buttons, which appear once you've unlocked an item. I know we haven't added the item name yet to the billboard GUI, but we'll get to that. I mean, I'll show you how to do it right now. All you need to say is button.billboard GUI dot text label dot text equals get item from template plot button get attribute ID of item to unlock dot name or empty string, just in case it doesn't exist. And then if you click on play here, I've just realized all of my buttons have been purchased. So I'm going to have to reset my data one more time. I will just speed up the video for this part. Okay, I've just reset my data and I'm going to join the game. And there you go. It now has the name of the item above the button. So it says conveyor. I purchase the conveyor and then suddenly the dropper appears and then the painting appears. Perfect. So there you go. That was how to add sub buttons into your Tycoon. I hope it was useful. If it was, please like, please subscribe, share the video, and I'll see you in the next one.